debated making a video on this and debated making a video on this. And I just got interrupted by a lady that needed me to submit more paperwork for a financial aid application at Baptist, and I thought maybe that was God above telling me that I didn't need to make a video on this for a second, but I do need to make a video on this. When I was watching the president's address a couple of days ago, there came a point where, especially when he was talking about Social Security, where you know how you can look at someone and you can begin to tell when they're ad-libbing as they go. When he was talking about Social Security and he began to ad-lib about numbers, and he began to make up the numbers that they're finding about people that are supposedly receiving checks, and he was making up the ages of people that are supposedly still receiving benefits. I just thought back to my own Social Security journey, and I wanted to make a video and talk about it. I'm gonna put this here on YouTube first and see if Facebook will even allow it to be put on its Meta, platforms and Instagram. But I thought back on it, and I knew that I wanted to share what my Social Security journey was like. Growing up, I was born with a brain condition, and I had no accommodations whatsoever because I didn't need them. I grew up in a teeny tiny southern town where they wouldn't have known what to do with someone with my particular brain condition if they even fully understood what it was anyway. And because the device that pumps water away from my brain was working to its full capacity and I had no complications at that time, I didn't need accommodations anyway. And when I was about to graduate from high school, it took almost, in 2003, a declaration from Congress to get vocational rehabilitation to get on board for me to go to college out of state with congenital hydrocephalus as my disability, even though it's permanent and incurable, and that ticks both of the boxes for qualifying me for vocational rehabilitation. But anyway, I digress. And just to give some background, as an adult, I have had a really bad time with just complication after complication after complication as an American, with just nasty things happening because of lack of access to health care, because of people making near catastrophic errors, because of misdiagnoses, and yada, yada, yada. And I have been very fortunate to have a body that's basically made of Teflon and to have been just damn near indestructible, to be honest, and to have been brought back from the brink over and over and over again. 5 years ago, that being said, 2 brain bleeds, a grand mal seizure, and everything else later, 5 years ago, I went through the worst comeback story of my life with a botched lumbar puncture, and having to come back from that, in a medical city where that made every clinician around me, very uncomfortable. It looked like I'd, done it to myself almost. And, I knew that for the first time, something that I wanted to avoid, I'd worked a lot, but something that I'd always wanted to avoid was filing for disability. But I knew that I did not have a choice because I could not do the physical work that I'd always grown accustomed to doing. And so for the first time, I started the process of really filing and seeing through Social Security disability in the state that I live in. And that process took 2 denials and 2 in-person hearings where I had to request those hearings to be seen in front of a judge myself, because the lawyer that was recommended to me by the hospital where I receive the bulk of my care for now, that was going to change soon probably, but like he was about as useless as a broken Ziploc bag. But anyway, like I had to request that I see him in person because a lot of my idiosyncrasies and the things that are wrong with me, even though I speak really well and I present really well, or more obvious in person. And so I had to request to see him in person, and it was just a whole thing. I had to file most of the paperwork myself, do a lot of the chasing myself. He was just utterly useless. So after 2 denials and 2 hearings with him, and then me having to explain what happened with a botched lumbar puncture, putting all my cards on the table, filing just lengthy paperwork, records, all these things, I was finally approved. But the thing that made me want to, like, really, that aided me about that address that the president made was him, like, saying that all these people are supposedly getting checks that are 100, he was like thinking of numbers as he spoke, that are supposedly 110, 120, 130, 140, 150 years old. That's baloney. I said a cuss word. That's baloney. And it's baloney because once I was finally approved, I had to go back to the Social Security office once the judge finally approved it, with a list of medical diagnoses because of all of these complications, the length of my arm. Once he finally approved it, I went to the Social Security Administration to ask some questions, and she said, "Oh, you're not going to get that for a month. And then the Medicare, because it's been 2 years, it won't be Medicaid, but it will be Medicare. The Medicare that you'll get," because this was in like late July to the beginning of August, "the Medicare isn't going to start until January." And I was like, well, why am I going to have to wait a month before I get any of the funds, and why is the Medicare not going to start until the beginning of the year? And this Social Security person said, because we're not going to pay you in case you pass away. And I could deduce from that sentence that she said very matter-of-factly, they don't provide medical care because you could pass away in that gap, and they won't have to, like that 6-month window, and they won't have to pay you. They account for every single dollar they spend because they have absolutely no desire to give you any of the money that you pay in early. And I worked constantly for over a decade. So the very idea that it is a Ponzi scheme and they're just like, here's a Social Security check, here's a Social Security check, here's a Social Security check for you, like Oprah's Favorite Things, those episodes from her show back in the day, is a load of baloney. It's a complete and utter, one of many falsehoods from that speech, but that was the one, as someone who experienced that process, that was the worst falsehood of that speech for me, because he insults the intelligence of the American people on a daily basis anyway, but particularly with that bit. That was the worst part for me. So, pray for us in America.